Dr. Atlas, Congress hasn't authorized war since World War II. Under the AUMF, what kind of military action has been authorized over the last 20 years?
Okay, so there's actually two AUMFs that have been passed. The first was right after the 9/11 attacks, just a few days later in 2001. And then there's also a second AUMF that was passed before the Iraq War in 2002. And so both of them relate to terrorism, but the 2002 AUMF is much more detailed, and it really was specifically about Iraq. And so when we talk about the AUMFs, we kind of want to talk about which one do we mean, because frankly, the wars on terror that really has started after the 9/11 attacks have been fought under both of these authorizations for military force. First, it's important to distinguish between the two of those, but they're very broad. So the first one, the 2001 after 9/11, which was passed by Congress on September 18th, 2001, is very short. It has 5 whereases, like whereas, and then the actual resolution itself is one long sentence. If I can, I'll just read it. It's one sentence. It says, in general, that the president is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. That is really broad. And that AUMF has been used to authorize counterterrorism operations all over the world. It obviously was used to authorize going to war in Afghanistan. And to get to your question about declarations of war, it's so broad. Congress is basically passing the buck, in a sense, to the president and saying it is up to you to determine who the enemies are and how the war is going to be waged. It is really, it's just passing it along. It's not a formal declaration whatsoever. And frankly, there hasn't been a lot of oversight, surprisingly little oversight, given how Congress basically just passed it on to the executive branch.
Does that authorization for use of military force essentially give the president free rein to take military action?
It pretty much has been seen that way. I mean, different presidents have used it differently. So obviously, President Bush used it to authorize a massive, military campaign in Afghanistan. President Obama used it to authorize selective targeted assassinations using drone strikes. And that was also being done under the same resolution. And then Obama actually was for the second AUMF, the one from 2002 on Iraq. He had actually talked about getting rid of it or supporting the idea of rescinding it, having Congress do that. Around 2013, 2014, he was talking about that. But then ISIS came into existence in 2014, and then the U.S. started operating again in Iraq against ISIS, really under the second authorization, the 2002 authorization. And so really since then, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about getting rid of it completely. President Biden signaled a few months ago that he was willing to revisit this. But now that we've pulled out of Afghanistan, with the very strong possibility that there could be new terrorist threats taking hold in Afghanistan, and President Biden has said he wants to go to a counterterrorism footprint around the world wherever it rises, I'm not so sure whether he's going to be supportive of taking out, removing the AUMFs, either the 2001 or the 2002. We'll have to see what happens with that.
So this was authorized 20 years ago to take out the folks responsible for 9/11, but then 20 years later, it's being used for ISIS or groups that are largely kind of unconnected. What's the danger of that?
Well, the danger is it can be used for pretty much any enemy that's defined by the president. And in fact, one of the things that critics have pointed out is that, and this goes back four presidencies. Okay, so it's 4 administrations. The actual list of targets, of terrorist targets that the United States has been fighting against is secret. It's classified. The American people actually do not know what are all of the different terrorist organizations that the United States is using force against under the AUMF. Congress even doesn't know, except for sometimes they'll get classified reports with a classified annex, and certain members of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees are able to look at those. But here you think about, we're a democracy. Congress authorizes the use of force, but we don't even actually know as American citizens who all of our enemies are that we're fighting against. And American soldiers, special operations people are actually, doing these all over the world, in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East as well.
And what would it take to remove the AUMF?
Well, Congress basically needs to just pass a resolution, rescinding it. The president would sign it. And what's interesting is, again, President Biden a few months ago, I think even back in July, signaled now that the House of Representatives has passed a resolution to rescind the 2002 AUMF. It hasn't gone to the Senate yet. And Biden had actually signaled that he might be willing to do that. However, the situation has changed now, and we don't really hear much about that. And frankly, I think just in general, dealing with these documents, the 2001 and the 2002 AUMF, those are not at the top of the priority list for President Biden. I mean, his legislative agenda is on, the infrastructure bills and COVID and all these kinds of things in the aftermath of Afghanistan. That's not something he's really talking about. And you don't really hear a lot of people in Congress making a big deal about it. Some of the progressives on the Democratic side, some of the more libertarian Republicans who really want to get rid of these, they talk about it, but there isn't really a large appetite to revisit that right now, which is actually interesting because, as you say, it is 20 years later. We've done a lot of things. We've had a lot of military conflicts since then, small ones as well as two major wars, and it really is not something that is being talked about a lot. You're bringing it up, which I think is very important, but it's not a major topic of conversation among the American people, and frankly, not even really in Congress. It's not the major issue that people are debating right now.
Dr. Atlas, last question. This was used to start a war 20 years ago that we've only just withdrawn from. If it's not repealed, could the could this be used to essentially start another war tomorrow or even 10 years from now?
Well, again, first of all, the United States is so divided, so deeply divided. Any president would have a really hard time basically sending troops into a major conflict on his own, unless we were actually, God forbid, actually attacked again. We have to remember, when the AUMFs were passed right after 9/11, it was pretty much unanimous. And most members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, the majority voted for the invasion of Iraq, the second AUMF. The United States at that moment was probably the most unified politically that we had ever been since Pearl Harbor. And the idea today that any president, a Republican or a Democrat, could basically say, I want to launch a war, I think that's not very plausible. I don't think he would have the support of the American people or of Congress. At that point, you might get some pushback. And again, frankly, it's not on the agenda. I mean, if anything, what Biden has signaled is he doesn't want to be doing this. He wants to end the war. He wants to get American troops out. He was much more concerned about dealing with China. And by the way, these AUMFs are specifically geared towards terrorism, towards the potential terrorist attacks with 2001, and very specifically towards Iraq, which makes the second one much more dated, frankly. But any other threats, like say from Russia or China or something like that, these AUMFs would not serve that at all. So no, a president could not say there's a conflict in the South China Sea or whatever, and we're going to use this AUMF. No, it'll have to be something completely different. So again, unless the United States is really attacked, again, the idea of launching a new war, I find very implausible using the AUMFs. However, responding to particular terrorist threats on the ground in Yemen or in someplace in Africa or the Middle East or Asia or elsewhere, specific Al-Qaeda groups or ISIS affiliates or things like that, that's going on all the time, frankly. And again, we don't even know which targets which groups are being targeted. And that is being done under the AUMF. And frankly, you could make an argument that Congress should rein this in. They should revisit it, revise the language. It absolutely, as you said, it's 20 years old. And it needs to be at least revisited, I think. But I just don't know how much of an appetite there is for that, given everything else that's going on, and given how divided the United States is right now.
Dr. Atlas, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.